I will have that conversation with him later.
You know what?
Oh, we have handouts. Y'all didn't know we had handouts? We got handouts. Deborah's got some there. Shirley's got some here. They're the hander-outers.
Give me 2 or 3 out.
We can share.
One page, front back.
Thank you. Jim might have one.
Same thing. I divide it. Call me Mo.
Can I sit by your wife?
Please do. Keep her away because she gets bored hearing the same guy droning on and on all the time. So if we run out, it's easy enough to get some more printed. Last week, I printed like 35. And I had like 15 left over. So this time I went 20 or 25, and there's more people in here. You never know in this class. Ever. Ever. It's kind of like in worship. We never know how many people we're going to have. We had so many guests that come down here. Never know how many to prepare for. So, good to see you. We are, in our class, talking about the empowering words of Jesus. And this is our third week of this class. And talk about the words of Christ. Well, let me ask you a couple of questions first. How's that? When do you have a tendency to feel guilty or unworthy? When do you have a tendency to feel those ways?
Sunday morning.
Sunday morning. You know that ain't right, not here. In fact, I got some stuff in my notes about that here in a little bit. Yeah. So when do you have a tendency to feel guilty and unworthy? Maybe right after you give in to temptation. You ever felt guilty after you did that? I mean, oh yeah. I mean, sometimes it'd be simple, sometimes not. You know, I mean, even if we're trying to lose weight and we don't need to eat that donut, we need to have a healthy alternative. And then we're eating that donut, and somebody like Wayne Carver, without mentioning his name, looks at us. And he's got that way of making us feel guilty. We're not drinking something healthy. We're eating a donut, right? And then we feel all...
You asked me, I told you Sunday
guilty.
morning. I didn't say when Sunday morning.
I don't think anybody feels guilty.
Hey, Wayne, watch it. I don't feel any guilt, because I'm past that.
Once you said your heart gets scorched, you know.
Then I'll die and go to heaven, and I'll be looking back at you falling out of chairs down here saying, ha ha, I'm in heaven and you're not. So,
Eating a donut.
I'll be eating tons of donuts in heaven. So, and fried chicken. I'm getting hungry. So, when do we have a tendency to feel guilty and unworthy, given in temptation? Maybe when our mistakes are openly public. Maybe when we think of a past wrong. Yes, Jack?
I feel guilty when I study
When you study the Bible makes you feel guilty.
because of all the things that are in there, you know, all the things. First, we talked about this, you know, growing up in a very conservative group, every Sunday all we talk about is what we do wrong. And so you get to this feeling that you're never going to get it right.
I can see where today's class is going based upon what Deborah said and you said. And I'm dealing with a lot of guilt-ridden people.
Some of us have outgrown it. We've learned from you.
And some of us have not. I've outgrown some things. Some things, for some reason, I still have some guilt about. I was raised very conservative, and many of us here were, where we've had just guilt heaped upon us. With that being said, let me first give a caveat here. Not all guilt is bad, okay? If you slip out the side door while I'm preaching and go out there and steal the hubcaps off my car, you should feel guilty. Yes? Yes. You should. We have the only car with hubcaps. Anybody else have hubcaps? Okay. What's a hubcap? Thank you. There is sometimes, though, reasons to feel some guilt. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. But I don't want you to think, wow, this is great. I never have to feel guilty about anything. Yeah, you should. But I think there's some unwarranted guilt we're going to look more at today. Sometimes we feel guilty when we're rewarded or recognized for maybe doing very little, or you don't feel like you did enough or whatever. You're rewarded or recognized for that. Kind of in line with what Jack and Deborah said, you know, we have a tendency to feel guilty and unworthy when we hear lessons or sermons that relate to our own weaknesses. Okay, so let's put it out there. Today, that bozo preacher you got started talking about inviting people to church. How many of us felt a little guilty we don't do enough of that? No, I do. I told you, I've started initiating the conversations with my physical therapist, with her receptionist, having spiritual conversations with them, with the lady at Home Depot. Now, those aren't all the people I've met, so you've got to think, there's other people I have not just brought up something spiritual, just something small.
Luke and Deborah have a story.
Y'all want to share your story?
We've been to 2 different restaurants over the last, 2 weeks, and each time the waitress would come up, we'd say, can we pray for you? And the person said, right now?
Can we hold hands?
So she held hands,
She
and we
just
prayed
stood right
for
there.
her.
She grabbed my hand, she grabbed Luke's hand.
You know, that's an absolutely amazing story. One that I don't think I could ever do that.
We take your name off.
You take the name tag. There you go.
We just asked her, was there anything that we could pray for her about? I mean, she'd already taken our order and turned it in, and she came back to see if there's anything else, and she just said, right now?
Was this waitress you already had a?
Never saw the
Never
woman
saw
in
her before.
life.
No, that's great. I don't know if I can do that. That is great that you can. Now there's some other things I can do.
We've had some people that have modeled that for us, though. That's made the difference.
That's good. That's good. And hopefully all of you heard they prayed with the waitress at a restaurant right then, right there. Wow, that's powerful. We have different ways of just talking to someone in a spiritual manner. So, yes, sometimes we have lessons or sermons that relate to our own weaknesses and we feel guilty. I've told people, number one, in my lessons, I don't target people. Listen to me. I don't target people. Sometimes people say, you were thinking about me. Or maybe somebody comes in during the week and we talk for an hour or two. And then my lesson is something that maybe we had talked about. My lesson was already done. I don't target people. With that being said, if your toes are being stepped on and you feel some guilt, it ain't me. Love that English. It ain't me. It's the good Lord. So, not all guilt is bad. Sometimes we need to feel some guilt.
I have a story.
Oh, go ahead.
I've told it before, but I don't think Todd was here to hear it. It was one of Todd's sermons back when you were preaching, and I felt the same conviction. And I remember praying for a while, God, give me opportunities to share with people. And that was just before I came a handyman full time. And I'll tell you what, I'm in people's homes, I see people's troubles, and I've had so many opportunities. And just last night, I was talking to the son of a neighbor, and he needed some word, and he needed some encouragement, because he's going through a young 20-something, going through that period of life. He wants to live for others. But there are just so many opportunities around us. Just keep an eye open. And he and I just visited, and he wants to start going to church, and he's got this journey. But
That's great.
there are opportunities everywhere.
Just having those spiritual conversations.
But that was Todd. Something you said, that guy that fingers sermon, he never knew what he had done with Bobby, but I just want to make sure Todd knows that.
Yeah.
I heard him at least
Well, good.
once.
That's good. That's good.
That's because I was preaching right at you that day.
So Todd is actually the opposite of me. Todd would talk to people to get sermon ideas.
But if there are struggles that all of us have, I mean, that's one of the things that we're doing in ladies' class right now. We're doing a book that Max Lucado wrote about anxiety. And if you don't have anxiety with some of the stuff that's been going on in the world,
You've been asleep.
then yeah, you're unconscious. Because so there are things that maybe the entire church or a large number of us might have something to deal with that you can address from the pulpit when you hear about it.
You're right. I agree, Deborah. And I probably don't address as much as what I should at all about current day events. But
I like what you address about we need your person in the chair or in the pew as opposed to a pajama Christian.
yeah. Yeah. So
Excuse me.
I said we need your person in the pew, not to be a pajama Christian. We have a lot of pajama Christians after COVID, and they have remained pajama Christians because, let's face it, it's easy.
Sure.
And it's a whole lot more convenient to be a pajama Christian.
God created community. God
So-
created unity.
So one day, maybe this summer, with the elders' permission, I'm going to do a sermon. David's going out with me. We're going out by boat to Crab Island. He's going to film me. I'll give a sermon from my boat, and y'all will watch it here.
I don't do water.
Can't we watch it on the water?
I don't think my boat will carry everybody. Rhonda won't let me get a bigger one. Okay, we can do that.
I'm sorry, you said boats, sir. I got to say.
Lastly on this, the last thing I had was we have a tendency to feel guilty and unworthy, and that's when contemplating death. So this past week, I received a call from someone here to talk to someone. This person is contemplating death. They have a disease, end stages, and they don't know as long as they have. So, never have had a spiritual life, but now they're contemplating death, and they're feeling some guilt and remorse and wondering where they stand with God, and they're reaching out. So, I'm working with that. But that's just one other place where we can feel some guilt when we look back on our lives. Not always just contemplating death, but looking back on our lives. So, then, when you have a tendency to feel, or what are some things people do in an attempt to get rid of their guilt?
Drugs or alcohol.
Drugs and alcohol.
Rationalize,
Denial.
they might say something like, I'll be in heaven watching you.
Next question.
You're feeling guilty?
Rationalization.
Talk about rationalization.
Yeah, they try to rationalize.
I'm not
Well-
as bad as so-and-so.
I'm not as bad as them, or I messed around because my spouse had an affair because my spouse ain't doing what he or she should be doing. So really, it was okay. We'll just rationalize this. And I'll be honest with you, we're pretty good at rationalizing things.
We're very good.
Especially if it's something we want.
Oh, yeah.
People project too, like they'll project it onto somebody else to
Oh,
try
yeah.
and relieve themselves.
They made me do it.
Say again?
They made me do it.
They made me do it. Made me do it. Flip Wilson. Devil made me do it, right? All these young folks went, who is that?
Eve also.
Eve, yeah.
Blame it on Eve.
Well, she blamed it on the snake, but Adam said, it was that woman you sent me. I quote that every now and then. It was that woman you sent me. That made me
And
be
God
right.
approved of that comment. I don't think I'd use that comment.
Say that to yourself.
Our house is interesting sometimes. I have used some Bible verses. I was like,
It backfired.
certainly that's not in context. I said, no, but it's there. It sounds good. So we do a number of things to get rid of our guilt. We'll look at that a little bit more here in a minute. Few human emotions are as distressing and painful as feelings of guilt and shame. Yeah. The self-condemnation that accompanies such feelings can be, it can be pretty overwhelming. Yet when we're feeling guilty and unworthy, Jesus does speak some empowering words to us. So, the experience of guilt. Guilt is a feeling or belief associated with the idea that one has done something wrong. Now, this could be either because we have done something wrong, or we think we've done something wrong, or we might have done something wrong, or maybe we were just thinking something wrong and can feel some guilt.
Or it could be you don't do anything at all.
Sure, have some guilt about that.
It doesn't have to be wrong, just don't do it.
Exactly. You see, some of us are especially good at heaping guilt upon ourselves. Some are better than others. Some have a PhD in heaping guilt. Typically, it's an emotional state that causes a person to feel sensations of personal disapproval and unworthiness. We believe we've done something we should not have, or not done something we should have. We feel this feeling of failure, dejection, and shame. And we have this voice of disapproval that reminds us of our mistakes. This voice reminds us of our mistakes, and oftentimes it exaggerates them.
Replays them over and over.
The replay is over and over, as Deborah said. And we just can't get past it. Certain personal predilections can make a person prone to guilt and more likely to feel guilt. Low self-esteem, perfectionist tendencies, inability to forgive or let go of anger, frequent anxiety, and the need to be in control. Guilt is a natural occurrence of those who have some sense of moral reasoning. Those who do not possess a moral framework for living usually exhibit a distinct lack or remorse of guilt. Yes, we'll look at psychopaths. Psychopaths, they feel no guilt for personal moral violations because they lack the ability to evaluate situations in an ethical framework. Consequently, they operate under no sense of any kind of moral restraint. Why we call them psychopaths. They don't have that feeling of guilt. So if I were to tell you, okay, you don't need to feel guilty at all. Oh, so you're trying to tell me I need to be a psychopath. No, some guilt can be good. Psychopath has no feelings of guilt. Jared, you have something?
I'm just gonna add, live in their conscience. God says good conscience. You look around the world today too much, there's so many people that lose their conscience seared. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's right. Get the conscience seared. Some people have no good conscience. I mean, it's, yeah. So guilt is such an unpleasant emotion. People do almost anything to get rid of it. They pursue a number of options in order to purge their lives of guilt. We mentioned drugs and alcohol. We may try to escape, well, through the pursuit of pleasure, which could be drugs or alcohol, which could be temporary, or some other pleasurable thing. We may try to ignore the stress through activity and work. We just put it to the side. We just stay so busy with this, we won't feel any guilt. We try to mask our feelings through false optimism and outward joy. You know, if I just fake it until I make it, I just keep doing that. I'll just be positive. Now, I see the value in positive outlooks, positive living, but don't lie to yourself. Be honest. We may compensate for guilt by condemning and criticizing others. You know, why am I better than everybody else? Or if I'm worse, it's because they did something, you know, I don't make as much money as them, so yeah, I bet they're selling drugs. That's what they're doing. They're doing something evil. Yeah, I know they are. Because they shouldn't be making all those trips to the Bahamas that they're doing a drug run. Why am I talking about drugs so much today?
Don't ask questions to which you do not want to have a commentary.
Sometimes they're rhetorical questions. So, back in the 80s, I was down here at Eglin Federal Prison Camp. It's no longer there. They moved it, but it used to be here. And we used to do a Bible study. Living out here, but they do a Bible study. My father-in-law and I think we had one or two others. And anyway, I got to know one of the guys out there. But they used to work with us on base. It was a minimum security. There were no bars. They could walk off if they wanted to. But these people are normally white-collar type crimes. Some drugs, but nothing hard, mainly marijuana. There's one guy there, and he said he got caught with a little marijuana. I said, a little marijuana? I said, man, I know people got caught with a little marijuana. They didn't go to prison. He said, well, I had a whole boatload of it. Well, okay. Fast forward about 6 or 8 years, Ron and I are living in Montgomery, Alabama. I started a prison ministry out there. I was working for the Hunter Station Church up there. We would go out there, 2 or 3 of us, and same thing, federal prison camp, just like this one. And lo and behold, walking down the sidewalk one day, and his prisoner passes me, looks at me, I look at him, it was the same guy.
Two boatloads.
I said, what in the world? And we were talking, well, in order to pay all the lawyers for his first one out here, after he finally got out, he went and got some more marijuana. It was like a never-ending cycle. That's enough marijuana and boatload type stories for today. So, getting rid of these feelings of guilt. We try to do self-sacrificing things in an attempt to make up for past sins. We may repress the guilt and totally deny anything is wrong. But honestly, these things are ineffective. I have worked with people in counseling situations where there was guilt, and that is something that can be difficult to get rid of. And in working with that, it's not just they come in one day and magically an hour later they leave and, hey, I'm guilt-free. Thank you, Gary. You are the smartest person ever because I no longer feel guilty. I can't do that. It is a process to help people get past guilt that they are putting on themselves for reasons that they shouldn't. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory. We've all messed up. We've all done things we wish we shouldn't have. We haven't done things we should have. So let's have a great big old guilty pity party right now. No, let's don't. Jesus can and does forgive. I wish we could forgive ourselves like he forgives us. Guilt doesn't disappear. Sense of unworthiness often remains. Yet even those who try to face their guilt responsibly and acknowledge their sins, try to live better, oftentimes they still live with unresolved guilt. Sad truth is many committed Christians live with a recurrent spiritual insecurity that leads to an oppressive sense of absolute unworthiness. Wow. Now we're all sad. This is sad, isn't it? Because we're thinking about all
Sad
the
that there are
people.
people that feel that way.
Yes, yeah, it is. Ever said it's sad that there are people that live that way. And there are all this guilt. So, consequences of unresolved guilt, living with a continued sense of unworthiness and insecurity, interpreting present events as punishment for past sins, as with Joseph's brothers back in Genesis chapter 42, developing a callous and indifferent attitude towards sin and evil, displaying a critical and condemning nature, experiencing a pervading but unexplained feeling of discontentment, and having a profound fear of death, which is experienced openly or subliminally. So, that being said, Jesus came to take away our guilt. We sometimes act as if guilt is something God likes. Let me reread that. We sometimes act like guilt is something that God likes. And we often feel more religious the more guilty we feel. Did I just say that? Some get a sense of satisfaction. Oh, go ahead, Sherry.
I'm sorry, sidebar, actually, true story, but Martin Luther, that was one of his issues, because he was, he was Catholic, and he was a monk, and he learned about, I don't know how they teach it, I really don't, but anyway, he would scourge himself to pay for his, his penance, and he never felt better. And he was wondering, this is such a vicious cycle. Why am I beating myself up so badly physically, but I still don't feel better spiritually? And therefore, he was reading Bible because he was a monk, and he learned, hey, I don't have to do this. Jesus did it for me on the cross. Interesting. And then he ran away from the monastery, and that's not the point, though. The point was, he would beat himself. He would sleep on nails. He was a very sincere, repentant human being, but he would never feel better. And I just think the point is no matter how much we beat ourselves up, if you don't have Jesus in the mix, which he did, but not not judging, just saying. I'm just saying, you can't ever make yourself feel better if you don't have Jesus.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we often do feel as though God likes our guilt, and some get a sense of satisfaction when condemnation is offered from the pulpit because they believe it is the proper and religious thing to do.
But mostly that's when condemnation is, they feel like it's offered to somebody else, not to them.
Well, oftentimes, and I don't believe this as much anymore. I don't think I beat people up from the pulpit.
You grew up like that, though.
Well, I did with a certain amount of. You didn't feel like you'd been to church unless you left after having a good beating. And I wasn't necessarily raised like that so much with our preacher, who was a great, wonderful man, still is. But there was a certain amount of guilt and all. Grace wasn't talked about as much. And I try to have some sense of balance in that the God of grace is also the God of judgment. And we need to remember that and keep that balance. We sometimes assume that guilt is to be encouraged, or that is what will compel a person to get right with God. Not necessarily. So if we go out and beat on our pulpits about how hot hell is, or how bad hell is, and how we should feel guilty and all, what you'll find, you might get some converts. But the kind of converts you'll get will be on shallow ground, they will make that turn. The best thing you can do is to teach people about the love of Christ, the love of God. That takes root, because people can only put up with so much guilt and being afraid of hell in their lives. Finally, they say, what's the use? If I can't go to heaven because I got all this guilt and I feel bad and I'm going to hell, I might as well enjoy life. Don't go to prison for stealing bubble gum. Steal a Lamborghini. So if I'm going to go to hell anyway, I mean, you kind of follow some of the reasoning here. Teaching people the love of Christ. Loving people to the Lord. Not guilting them to the Lord. So it's important to remember that Jesus came not to foster guilt, but to liberate us from it. We see that in John 3:17-18. We stand condemned not because of Jesus, but because of our own sins. I think we know that. Jesus came not to condemn us, but to save us. He came not to increase our guilt, but to release us from guilt's debilitating effects. Writer Hebrews comments that even after repeated offerings and sacrifices under the Jewish system, worshipers still felt a continuous sense of guilt, because ceremonial sacrifice can't take away the guilt of sin. That's in Hebrews 10:1-4. Yet with the sacrifice of Christ, guilt is totally, completely removed, and we can live before God in absolute freedom and confidence. Hebrews 10:22. Listen to this. Some of you might never heard this verse. Hebrews 10:22. Let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us of a guilty conscience. Don't know that was in your Bibles? Yeah, that's there. Hebrews. You need to highlight that. To cleanse us of a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. To cleanse us of a guilty conscience, people. Highlight that, mark that, put that in your Bible. Put that up on your wall at home with one of those little plaques that you can buy. I don't know if there's any that say cleanse us of a guilty conscience, but make one and put it up. Cleanses us of a guilty conscience. Jesus often encountered people who, because of their choices or circumstances, lived a life of guilt. Lepers felt a little guilty and completely shunned. A woman in Samaria was a failure in relationships in John chapter 4. Zacchaeus, the tax collector, talked about him in the sermon this morning. Rejected by his people and his nation. Man born blind in John chapter 9, who many assumed was a great sinner. And John chapter 8, the adulterous woman who was publicly humiliated. Sinful woman who was overcome with gratitude in Luke chapter 7. And let's not forget Peter. Do you think Peter felt a little guilty? Is it the King James that says he went out and wept bitterly? Yeah, those were some guilty tears, man. Oh my. But Jesus spoke words to all these people in response to their guilt. He speaks to us with those words today. So, John chapter 8, verse 11. neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin. So the story of Jesus here recorded in John 8, 2 through 11 relates a very classic confrontation between Jesus and the Jewish establishment at the time. Jesus in the temple courts, he's drawing crowds, teaching the folks. He said, while he's still preaching to the multitude, they bring a woman caught in the act of adultery, a crime that carries with it the death penalty. She caught in the very act. Pharisees then offer a challenge to Jesus. Hey, the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say? They're referring to Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, which instructs both partners, man and woman, are supposed to be stoned as penalty for adultery. However, Jesus' opponents are not really interested in fulfilling the law. They are trying to trap him, as we know. If Jesus says stone her, then he's contradicted his own obvious message of grace, and he lays himself open to a charge of sedition, for only the Romans could carry out the death penalty. But if he forbids the stoning, then they accuse him of going against the law. And Jesus, in his way, he does not respond, stoops on the ground, scribbles with his finger in the sand. Some think Jesus writing down the sins of the Pharisees, but I think he's just ignoring her accusers. He's not paying them much attention. He's listening to all their babbling. And here he is, the Lord of the universe, with this accused woman. Bless her heart. Jesus probably just stoops down. I mean, I guess we all have our own mind's eye of what he's doing. He just, in my mind's eye, he just kind of shakes his head a little bit. He loves them. He loves all these people, the accusers, the woman caught in adultery, the man who wasn't there, who was in adultery. He loves them all. He just wants them to do right. But he doesn't like that this woman here is just being beat up. So he ignores them. He stoops down. He scribbles with his finger in the ground. He's ignoring them, and his opponents keep insisting he respond to their question. He finally does. Straightening up, Jesus announces in John 8, verse 7, if any of you is without sin, let him cast the first stone. And the older folks started leaving first, and the younger. After all of them gone, Jesus sure rhetorically says, woman, where are they? What a victory. This could be made into a Hallmark movie, couldn't it? Has no one condemned you? You ever wondered why? I mean, here's Jesus, this woman, and this crowd. They're after Jesus. They're not as much after her. She's a pawn. They're after him. The older ones leave. The younger ones leave. So, have you ever wondered this? Why didn't she just leave with them? I mean, this has got to be humiliating. She's been caught in the act of adultery. It's not good. Had to be embarrassing, humiliating, hurtful, many other words. She could have left. I think she could have left. Maybe you look at that different. The Bible doesn't tell us. This is just Gary's mind working, which goes off on some tangents sometimes, as I'm sure you can see by his preaching abilities. And he forgets where he is. And he looks at his wife, and she goes, that means,
Get back on your list.
get back on the list. Walk back to the lectern. It's just such a sweet story. She replies, no one's present to condemn her. And Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin. Good night. So in the midst of her guilt and her shame, the woman heard these empowering words of Jesus. Church, we can use these words too. Through his word, he not only refused to condemn her, he lifted her spirit in a very dramatic way. You see, Jesus offered 3 very encouraging messages to her. Watch this. He placed her on an equal level with her accusers. If anyone's without sin, let him throw the first stone. In the middle of a scenario that separated shame sinners from righteous accusers, Jesus brought them all together by articulating the principle of equality. Yeah. We're all equal here. So go ahead, you folks without sin, cast the first stone. For a woman who felt grossly inferior to all around her, he spoke words that affirmed her common connection to all humanity. Yeah. He offered acceptance instead of condemnation. Neither do I condemn you. She was familiar with a world that offered condemnation and rejection. Jesus offered the very opposite of what she expected. Didn't Jesus do that live? She's a caught sinner. This wasn't hearsay. She'd been caught in the act. Publicly exposed. Undeniably guilty. Yeah. But Jesus speaks to her in words that demonstrate love and respect. Then he encouraged her to change her life. You know, he said, go now, leave your life of sin. See, he didn't just whitewash sin. I don't condemn you. I don't. You're good. You're good. But, you know, go on now. Or as Robert Irvine likes to say, off you go. From Restaurant Impossible. Like 2 of us know what that is. He says, go now and leave your life of sin. You know, I read these stories. I read over it, get ready for this class, and read over, read over, read over. That's just such a powerful story of the nature of humanity and the divinity of God. Yes, Jack?
You know, one of the most moving aspects of this kind of verse is the realization that God's forgiveness is different. It should be the same as ours, but it's different than ours. Because God's forgiveness is forget. And
Separate as far as the east is from the west. That's in the Bible. Where is it, Never mind. I'm putting you on the spot. Go ahead, Jack.
so my point was just to say, if you believe that you start over, which solves the problem you have of this massive load of guilt from this life that you lived, if you believe that every time you ask to be forgiven, and he forgives you when you start over, then how you face people in your life has to change. It's
Yeah.
parable of the dinner.
Yeah.
You have been forgiven this monumental amount of sin. How can you hold accountable this? And we as humans don't do that. I think we as humans, I forgive you, but we're going to talk about it again later.
And I'm gonna bring it up every time I see you. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna remind you what you owe me.
That is true, Jack. And yeah, Wayne.
I think too, guilt is also kind of like fear, because when you have guilt, you have some fear. You fear that maybe God will punish you. I think what was good about this example here was she had a fear of being stoned, and now that fear was gone, and so in a sense her guilt was gone, because now she didn't feel like she was going to be put to death for something she had done wrong. And I think, so if you think about what guilt is and what sin does to you, it makes you feel dark. I think he calls it walking in darkness. When you sin, you're walking in darkness, feeling this guilt, feeling this fear all the time.
it does for us is look, be more positive about our life. It's not so much we are beating ourselves up all the time, but we're looking at the happy things of life, the joys of life, and maybe the blessings that we can get. Most sin has a negative impact on your life. It has a negative impact either on your life or someone else's. So when you don't sin anymore, there are more blessings that you will experience because now you're not bringing these things on yourself.
Okay. Thank you. People don't change by being shamefully reminded of their faults. Neither do they change when people treat sin with indifference and apathy. People change when those who are serious about sin offer love and forgiveness. Matthew 9:13, I have not come to call the righteous but sinners. In his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, you ever read that by Philip Yancey? A few shaking your heads, okay. The Jesus I Never Knew reflects that the more unsavory the character, the more at ease these people seem to be around Jesus. Think about that. The more unsavory. It was the righteous folks that didn't much care for Jesus. I mean, the ones who so-called self-righteous, okay? The more unsavory they were, they hung out with him. The outcasts and sinners of society found Jesus appealing, while the pious and respectable types were bothered by his message and surprised by his behavior. Jesus shocked the establishment by eating in the home of Matthew, the tax collector, as well as other sinners. One wonders if any religious person ever associated with this group, much less eaten with them. Tax collectors were viewed as unscrupulous traitors. Pharisees are so stunned by Jesus' behavior, they offer a question in chapter 9, verse 11. Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? That's Matthew 9:11. Jesus responds, it's not the healthy who needs a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. That's another passage y'all need to put up in the house somewhere. So Matthew was encouraged by Jesus' presence, empowered by his words. For those who live regularly with rejection and criticism, how heartening it is to hear someone say mercy is more important than condemnation. In the presence of rejected sinners, Jesus says to the Pharisees, I'm more interested in these people than in you who spend time condemning them. Words of Jesus contain an obvious, heartening message. Sinners are worthy of my attention and respect, and they are going to receive it. So lastly, right here, Jesus speaks. Now, these words here are not in the Bible. This is paraphrased. Gary's paraphrase of Jesus. Your sins have not diminished my love. You're no less valuable and important to me than the most righteous man or woman. And then Luke 23:34, I'm not here to condemn, but to forgive. Nothing you do can keep you from being your advocate. Luke 23:34. And Jesus basically saying, I entreat you, turn from your sin, follow me. Pretty easy. I went over today. Once again, not my fault. Preacher went long. So have words with him, not with me.
Psalms 103:12.
Psalm 103:12. Remove my sins as far from the east as the west. Right. They're gone. Wish we could do that. Any questions? Anything profound? No profundity? Yeah, he's pretty. All right. Thanks, guys. We will see you next Sunday. Or Wednesday. Wednesday, 6:30. Be here.
Or Tuesday.
Tuesday,